partnership with Tux Care. Tux Care is a vendor that focuses on Linux-specific workloads, and they do what's called live patching. So for those of you who want to try to keep a maximum amount of uptime for your Linux distributions, they are able to patch the kernel and a few other components on there without having to reboot. That live patching approach helps to keep your operational uptime intact as long as possible before you have to do any reboots. Doesn't mean that the reboot isn't necessary at some point, but you can go longer periods of time without having to reboot because you're able to live patch many of the vulnerabilities that you need to worry about there. So the first one that they kind of outlined for us this month is probably the most concerning. All Linux distributions running Erlang OTP are vulnerable to this vulnerability. So the vulnerability, it's been out for, patches have been starting to come out for a little while here. It first published, many of the vendors who were looking at this first published in late April and had some recent updates on this. So we've talked about this on here before, but the Linux world, because of the open source nature, oftentimes takes a little bit longer to mobilize, and several of these platforms may lag behind more than others. So you may see vendors who are using Linux distributions as their IoT devices. Some of them are very quick to respond on this. In fact, Cisco is a good example of this. If you go query or Google search this CVE, you will actually see a article from Cisco that was released on April 22nd. It gives a very good breakdown of all the different devices within their ecosystem that are running this, the versions that are released that resolve the issue, and give you kind of a good comprehensive breakdown of everything. With a lot of other vendors, you unfortunately have to really go digging and looking for this information. So the versions are included in the mitigation section on this slide that you want to make sure you get up to the patched version. A temporary workaround would be disabling SSH server or to prevent access via firewall rules. That's obviously going to cut off access to things or potentially reduce availability. So patching may be the more viable solution for you if it's something that you need broader access for, especially if it's customer facing. So that is the first of the Linux vulnerabilities we're talking about this month. The next one is Next.js. So React-based web framework is very commonly used out there. That one is also made a little bit of news in the past, probably since late March. The first articles around this came out in the end of March, but that Next.js middleware platform has this vulnerability, and it does allow attackers to execute bypass authorization to execute code. So vulnerability that you definitely want to take a look at and make sure that you're identifying where it is in your web environments and get that resolved. The third one that they highlighted for us this month is vulnerability on Tomcat. So depending on what platforms you're running it on, wherever you're running your Tomcat, Apache Tomcat instances, this is a vulnerability that I believe this one has been actively exploited. The first articles that I saw around this were published towards the end of March. But this vulnerability has been actively targeted. There is mitigation recommendations you can do, monitoring that you can apply, deploying WAF rules, different things like that. But ultimately, patching is the ideal path to get this fully resolved in your environment. So take a look at those versions and make sure that you're getting your Apache Tomcat instances on Linux up to date.